To begin with, let me make it perfectly clear that I'm not a supporter of Islam. In fact, I think it's yet another one of the world's anti-freedom, anti-reason, anti-morality, backward primitive philosophies we collectively refer to as religion. However, that being said, whether I, or any other American for that matter, support the Israeli or the Palestinian cause, it's none of the United States' business, period. Americans don't understand why so many Muslims hate the United States because they don't understand Middle Eastern history. If they would take the time to look into it, they would see that the Muslim world really began hating America at the exact time Israel came into existence, 1948. And it wasn't just a coincidence. Up until President Truman made America the first nation in the world to officially recognize Israel as a sovereign independent state, America had a pretty decent relationship with both Islam and the Middle East. In fact, much of the Middle East actually liked and looked up to America, and many Americans romanticized the Middle East. I should also point out that Secretary of State George Marshall and the majority of Truman's foreign policy advisors vigorously opposed recognizing Israel because they knew it would infuriate and alienate both the Arab and Islamic world. And boy, were they right. Most Americans have bought into the conservative Christian Republican myth that the cause of 9/11 was Islamic jealousy of American prosperity. But that's complete and absolute nonsense. If it were true, they would have been hating America long before 1948. But conservatives run with this silly notion because they have nothing else to run with. It's a perfect example of tell the big lie long enough and enough people will begin to believe it. You see, it really comes down to one thing and one thing only. Christian America wants to support Jewish Israel. Since Christianity is historically based in Judaism, and Christians believe in the prophecies of the Bible, they believe Israel had to be recreated before Jesus would come back and save the world. Of course, this is complete and absolute nonsense, but that's what they believe. And thus, since the majority of Americans call themselves Christians, the rest of us are forced to support Israel whether we want to or not. You could say Christians need Jews for their sense of history, and Jews need Christians for their bodyguards. If you haven't figured it out yet, my basic premise is that the United States foreign policy, specifically the support of Israel, is a direct cause of Islamic hatred towards America and the current war on terror. Am I saying if the United States didn't support Israel, there wouldn't have been a 9/11? Absolutely. Am I saying Islamic extremists are justified in their terrorist activities? Absolutely not. I'm just trying to make it clear why they're doing it. They're doing it because of our continued support of Israel, and they're doing it because their hate has been exacerbated by our having troops on Muslim soil. And every survey that comes out of the Arab and Muslim world bears those two facts out. America's support of Israel costs us not only hundreds of billions of dollars in direct and indirect ways, but it's costing us countless American lives. And along with those costs, look at what it's costing us in regards to the loss of both freedom and security for the American people. It's absolute insanity that we're going through all this just because we want to prop up a tiny nation on the other side of the planet. Now, supporters of Israel will say at this point, but look at all the intelligence we get from Israel. Isn't that worth something? Sure, but here's the problem. If it wasn't for our support of Israel, we wouldn't need that intelligence. If we weren't being Israel's bodyguard, we wouldn't be being attacked by Israel's enemies. It's our involvement in this ancient, barbaric, xenophobic, religious war that's the cause of nearly all these problems. It's one thing to have trade and diplomatic relations with another country. It's quite another to be given one nation of religious zealots billions and billions of dollars in order to fight other nations of religious zealots. You cannot join one side in a war and expect the other side not to come after you for supporting its enemy. Does Israel have the right to exist? Does Palestine have the right to exist? What about the 36 million Kurds of northern Iraq, southern Turkey, and western Iran? Don't they have the right of self-determination? What about Tibet? There are millions upon millions upon millions of human beings who would love to have their own country based on their own culture, but don't. Is that fair? Of course not. However, who gets to decide? Nowhere in the Constitution is the United States government given the power to take the hard-earned wages of American citizens to build other nations or to prop them up. And what really amazes me about this issue is the fact that the very people who are supposedly avid supporters of the ideas of the Founding Fathers completely ignore what they said about becoming involved in wars between other nations. You know, that whole thing about beware of foreign entanglements. And even in more modern times, Eisenhower's warning, beware of the military-industrial complex. Just between military spending and interest on the debt alone, America spends $1 trillion a year. That's a 1 with 12 zeros. We can already blow up the entire world 20 times over. What more do we need? And with our own country falling to pieces because of both Democrats and Republicans, how long are we going to keep attempting to police the world? America needs to help itself before it loses even the ability to help others. Listen, this battle between the Israelis and the Palestinians has been going on for millennia, and it will probably continue to go on far, far into the future. We should just let them fight it out among themselves and stay out of it. However, I do have some questions of moral equivalency. If it's moral to recreate a nation that hasn't existed for 2,000 years, Israel, why isn't it moral to recreate nations that existed less than 200 years ago, Native Americans? If you want to find out, you'll have to go watch part 2.